Thank you everyone for being here today. My name's Heather and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 12. I received my DHF scholarship in 2021 and continued to stay on with the organization through the mentorship program as a mentee and then a mentor. For the past 2 years, I've been a program facilitator and I've worked on resources such as the Student Transition Planner and the Guide to Adult Care. Today, I'm so excited to present the Exercise and T1D webinar with Abby. We have a fantastic panel of speakers who will be sharing their lived experiences and professional insights on navigating exercise while living with T1D.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. We have three wonderful speakers joining us today. We have Ethan, Deborah, and Janet. Each of them has a very impressive bio, so I will let them introduce themselves. So, first up, if we can please give a warm welcome to Janet. Janet, I will let you take it away.
So my name is Janet, and I have been living with type 1 diabetes for 30 years, believe it or not. And I received my Diabetes Hope Foundation scholarship in 2011. So I've been volunteering with your organization as a mentor, mentee, when we couple different in-person events. So I'm really excited to get to share some of my other experiences today. I'm also a group fitness instructor, and I teach everything from Pilates to aerial hoop, strength training, cardio classes, you name it. I probably teach it. And then another little fun fact is I also now do adult gymnastics. So that gets to add a whole other little layer of complexity in on sort of exercise and doing things with devices attached to you, since I also use an insulin pump and a glucose monitor to kind of help manage my day to day.
Thank you, Janet. We're so glad that you are able to be here and share your insights. Ethan, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Abby. Hey everyone, it's great to be here. My name's Ethan. I have had diabetes for 9 years now, and I received the DHF scholarship in 2021. I'm now in medical school, and I did my undergrad at McMaster, and I'm doing medical school at the University of Toronto. So my involvement with DHF has pretty much been since I received my scholarship. So I've always admired all the programs that they do, and I've had the pleasure of being part of the mentorship program as both a mentee and a mentor, and then also just contributing to a variety of their resources like the transition guide. Also, one of my favorite things every year is to MC the Diabetes Hope Foundation scholarship ceremony and just welcoming everyone into the community. So again, I'm really excited to be here and learn from you all and share some of my perspectives. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ethan. We're really excited to get that medical background with the exercise in T1D. So thanks again for being here. And then lastly, we have Deborah. Take it away.
Hi guys. Yeah, so I'm Deb. I'm a registered dietitian working in Ottawa. I have my own practice here. I am also a trainer, personal trainer, and teach some fitness classes and do a lot of fitness and lifting myself in a variety of different sports, I guess you could say. I was never a competitive athlete, but I'm pretty active now. And also a mom of two boys, so have like a pretty busy day-to-day life. I've also had diabetes for 30 years, about 31 years coming up, and was also 12 when I was diagnosed. So we're hearing a lot of similar stories there. I've been through pregnancies, and 6 years ago, I was also diagnosed with celiac disease. So have a lot of different things going on. So hopefully can share some of those perspectives with everybody else out there who might be dealing with some of those things. As far as DHF, I was one of the first scholarship years that they had the scholarship. So yeah, I'm old, I guess is what it means. When Barb started it, I think it was maybe the first or second year that they had the scholarship, and it's been really, really fun to watch it grow over the years into a really big program with lots of amazing sponsors and helping so many kids. So at the time in 2001, it was a pretty small group. And I've been involved with various events and speaking with alumni, and also the transition guide and some nutrition documents and things that the DHF is putting out as resources. So it's always nice to stay involved. And yeah, just like everybody, love to learn from everybody. So we all share stories, and we'll see what today has to offer.
We will be diving into some individual questions first. Then we will bring everyone together for a group discussion where our speakers will share their experiences, planning ahead for workouts, and offering encouragement for anyone learning to juggle T1D and an active lifestyle.
So, whether you're an athlete, someone who's just getting started with movement, or somewhere in between, we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling informed, inspired, and supported.
All right, so let's get started. We will start by asking a panelist one question they can answer, and then we will open up the floor to the other panelists so that they can add their insights as well. Ethan, let's start with you. You have such a busy schedule. How do you manage balancing school and exercise while in medical school, as well as volunteering commitments such as the DHF Mentorship Program?
Yep, thank you for the question. I'm glad to kick things off. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I'm very busy, but I'm sure all of you are busy in some kind of capacity, in whatever you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis. I guess I can speak to what works for me, and then I'm also excited to hear what works for everyone else. Um, I think the biggest thing for me that I've realized is over time being in school, my class schedules have kind of changed from a bit more predictable, like they were in high school, like a typical, like 8 to 4 kind of schedule where you're kind of all in class. And then you move to university, and university now has like night classes, evening classes, and then stuff kind of all over the place. And then you move to medical school, and it's even less predictable with, your time always not really being yours to control. So I think firstly, it's just required a lot of adaptability over time, and just kind of understanding that sometimes, even though you might have the best of intentions to plan out your time, it often does not go the way you planned it, and that's totally fine. But to me, what's worked a lot as of late is just to time block exercise into my schedule in a way that's flexible, but also that ensures that I know that I'm kind of committing myself to doing at least something to move my body. And I try to do this kind of every day. So what this will look like is for weekly schedules in medical school, like you usually have all of those posted well in advance. And so I'm able to kind of look ahead and block my time to do exercise. And usually I'll just try to do that because as things get busy, it's very easy to kind of sweep exercise away because it's one of those first things that isn't really mandatory for you to do or for you to attend. And so there's a lot of personal accountability for that, but it's something that's been very important to me. So I just try to treat it like its own class. Um, I'm sure we'll get into this later with discussions, but there's also quite a lot of planning that has to happen around exercise, especially as people with type 1, like before you engage in exercise, it's almost like there's a whole activity before just getting ready for it. So having it blocked in my schedule kind of helps me plan backwards so that I don't feel like I'm not ready to start engaging in exercise, even though I blocked it off in my schedule. So I guess all that to say that time blocking for me has been very important, and looking ahead to make sure that I'm balancing like being flexible with also kind of being intentional about putting it into my schedule. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts, but I'm also happy to hear from other people too.
Thanks so much, Ethan. So great to hear from a student perspective as well. Deborah, the next question is for you. In your experience as a dietitian, what are some snacks you would recommend before engaging in workouts or helpful ways for people to time their meals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm going to be frustrating because I don't really have a lot of specific guidelines. I think just based on partially what Ethan has to say and my experience working with people and people with diabetes, it's just that everything is quite individualized. I think as far as tips would go for fueling, it would be, in an ideal world, the same tips for fueling that I would give any athlete, which is my preference when I'm speaking to people with diabetes and type 1. I mean, obviously there's nuances there, but in an ideal world, I would say you're an athlete and you're doing this exercise. You're not a type 1, and we deal with the type 1 stuff kind of as an afterthought because we don't want the athlete to go in not fueling properly for their performance just because of their blood sugar levels. So I mean, I think that the best thing to do, and this is probably going to be the answer to the other question too, is to take advantage of the CGM technology that we have as far as recognizing patterns to the best of our abilities, which I know is sometimes impossible, but just trying to get, without being hard on yourself, especially if you're just, starting up with a new exercise or starting up with exercise in general and it's new to you, to make use of your team and make use of the patterns that you're seeing around the different types of exercises that you're doing, or maybe the different types of exercise around the different types of time of day, and establish as best as possible what is actually happening with your sugars so that you can eat the way you want to eat, which I will describe later as far as like what would a normal or good nutrition plan be for somebody. And then kind of add on top of that the way to manage it with your diabetes as a secondary thing, if that makes sense, so that we're treating you as an athlete and fueling you as an athlete. Like there's a tennis pro who's he's got to manage his sugars, but he's got to go on to the tennis court with the right amount of carbs on board and all of that stuff, right? Otherwise, he's not going to perform. So I think it's, understanding nutrition fueling for anybody would be a little snack that involves carbohydrates and maybe a small amount of protein, and something that's digestible and something that's predictable, something that you do well with, which, and in a diabetic standpoint, right, it would be even more so if you know that food and you can carb count that food really, really accurately, and you're used to eating it on a regular basis, and you have a sense of how those foods, change your glucose levels, then even better. Good examples of snacks might be a smoothie that has some fruits in it and maybe a small bit of yogurt or protein powder, with some ice, so you've got the hydration piece, you've got a little bit of quick acting carbohydrates, and then you've got, a small amount of protein to keep that steady through your body. Or it could be like a small, a small overnight oat jar or something like that, that's got, again, like a bit of yogurt, some fruit, some oats, and some berries or something like that. So I think I mean, again, that could change depending on how long the session is, how intense the session is, what the individuality is to their response in terms of all of those things. But those are, generally speaking, what I would suggest for any athlete. And so applying that to a type 1 is no different. But what may be different is, how they titrate their insulin around that, how much they pull back. Maybe they have the snack and they take nothing because they know that they're going to go low. Or maybe they take that snack and they know they're going to go high, so they know that type of exercise spikes their glucose levels, so they need to take a little bit more. And, there's no, one size fits all, unfortunately, answer to those questions. It's a little bit, of what's happening. And of course, it's never a perfect science, as we know, which is part of the frustration. But I also think that in some ways that acute timing of what's going on with your sugars as far as safety is concerned is the most important. If sugars are a little bit high or a little bit high after or during, I think that the benefits of the exercise are ultimately the best. And so even if things like run a little bit high for an hour after and that feels frustrating, that there's still, cost benefit more to doing that. And then you can kind of deal with highs and stuff later. If that makes sense. I don't know if that was, a good answer, but maybe there's some questions around what I said.
Deb, I know that you mentioned that you have celiac. I also have celiac. My diagnosis is a little bit newer. It's only been 5 years. Do you find that there's a difference between fueling your body with gluten-free foods rather than regular? And like, what has your experience been with that?
I mean, I think to some degree, some of the gluten-free products are a little bit higher in glycemic index. Some of them are slightly lower in fiber and protein and more in refined starches. Like if you're looking at sort of your basic, breads, or if you're using like one-to-one gluten-free flours as a replacement, comparatively to like a whole wheat flour or something like that. But I mean, there are lots of ways, I think, of getting around that. For instance, the breads, I think nowadays with gluten-free are providing better options in terms of having added psyllium or um, different fibers added back. So I found that there are some products that are actually quite reasonable. And also other flours like oats and things like that, if that's okay for you, because some celiacs can't do that. That again would be like it would be the same as as somebody who didn't have celiac. So in that case, I would say not a huge difference. Um, but I mean, I guess it depends on the quality. If somebody is coming to me and they were not celiac and they were eating all sort of white Dempster's breads and refined granola bars and things, and that was making up their diet, they probably wouldn't see a huge difference transferring over to gluten-free. But you know what I mean? So I think it's more a focus on just generally speaking quality of the food. And if you are using some of those gluten-free products and that do have a higher glycemic index, just trying to change the glycemic index of the meal by adding lentils or something, or adding more vegetables to it, or making sure there's protein there so that you're almost sort of doing the same thing, if that makes sense. And I mean, as far as fueling is concerned, right? Like in some ways, the glycemic index being high is sometimes not a bad thing, because if we're looking for that like quick digestible sugars, like for you, like you were saying with high rocks, like then it would be almost of benefit to have something that was not overly fiber dense and was giving you a higher glucose response, right? So, I mean, I think it's partially just getting to know that a little bit and then adjusting accordingly. But I mean, I don't think nowadays it's a huge challenge if you're, especially if on a daily basis you're finding products that are a little bit more balanced, which I think is more available. What do you think, Abby? Like, have you noticed a change or?
When I first got diagnosed, there was definitely, I felt a change just in my energy levels. I'm sure that Ethan can speak more to this, that like my gut was still healing. And so like I felt like I couldn't give my all to exercise just because my body was just so destroyed. But I also feel like for carb counting, it's so for me, I found like that was a really big change.
Mhm.
And then going into exercise, like adding in exercise, that was a big adjustment because I found like I didn't know how to bolus right, and then exercise just makes me go low. So I found like there was no perfect world.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that I notice a bigger difference with the way my sugars react with, I would say, maybe gluten-free pasta, and some of the breads on the markets that like the bakery ones that are using just like more of those dense flours. But if you're looking at, like, for those of you who are on the call and looking for better options, the Oto's bagels, the Promise breads, some of the Char products, I would say, personally, I've noticed that those, I have more of a similar glucose response than some of the other sort of more refined ones, if that I've found. And often that's reflective of when you see the fiber coming in, you can see how many grams, and it kind of changes things. Mhm.
Appreciate that, Deborah. Janet, I'm gonna show you some love. Let's get some questions going. You have an overall such an active lifestyle. You're able to, like you said, you're a fitness instructor. You have all these different activities that you do. What does your pre-workout routine look like on a busy day? So food, checking BGs, insulin, and how does this change depending on the type of exercise that you do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, just like Deborah said, there's no one size fits all approach because really everybody everybody reacts differently. So it's like I have a couple days where I do teach classes over my lunchtime, and then again in the evening. So those days I obviously like my body is just please fuel me, give me all the food possible, and I always have to make sure that I've had sort of a bit of that snack so I can properly be fueled to teach a class. It's one thing to participate and you can just kind of sit but take a cool few minutes, easy, and if you go low and regroup, it's another when you're teaching. So I have actually had to teach chug a juice because I didn't plan well enough in my day or I had an unexpected low because surprise, cardio will almost drop you, especially earlier. Especially for me, I find if I'm earlier in the day doing that cardio, I'm just going to plummet so much more because my body doesn't have as much of that ongoing protein digestion happening and just it's always a bit of a challenge on those days. Other times I'm sometimes teaching, it's like, like Eden said, you have a slot in your schedule. So for me, it's actually like a weekly scheduled class, always at the same time, but kind of how my day leads up to it, I do my best if I can to actually meal prep. So doing meal prep a couple days a week really makes it easier for me to know exactly what I'm having as my meal. That way, when I'm running around between work and needing to get to the gym, I know exactly what meal I'm able to just quickly grab out of the fridge. And then can make sure it's fairly balanced. I know my carb counts because I'm not quickly just grabbing something and throwing it into the bowl. So that really allows me to plan a little bit. And then I make sure before every class, I check how much insulin do I have on board. So if I can, I always try to eat at least an hour before I teach, just so that the insulin's not going to be peaking during class. Obviously, that's a challenge when I'm teaching a class at 5:30 and I had to eat dinner right at 5 o'clock before I went. So I tried my best to kind of gauge what's my trend, how much insulin do I have on board even before I start the class so that hopefully I can prolong when I may need that next snack. Teaching 3 classes in a row, I'll usually need a little snack between, have a little bit of protein to hold me over, but it's always a little bit of a different challenge. I will teach one class that's more cardio based, drops me more every week. Then right after I teach the strength based class, so I know to not overtreat my low because I know that my muscles are going to be kicking out kicking out that glucose to bring it up. So I always have to be really cautious when I pair those 2 classes back to back.
You mentioned something really interesting about the blood sugars going low with the cardio and the difference between strength training. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience? I'm sure that most of us know that T1D is an art, not a science, and it does not stay the same for every workout. You could do cardio on a Monday, and then next Monday you do, oh, sorry, and on the first Monday you go low, and then next Monday you do cardio and you don't go low. Can you talk about your experience with how with some workouts you may see some blood sugar fluctuations and then some others you're completely fine? How do you find that?
So yeah, I do find that. I find it depends also like how much energy you even have going into it. Because I find if I'm more fatigued and or if you didn't sleep well, just because there's 500 factors that can play into your blood sugar management for the day. So if you're a little bit more tired, then I may not be going as hard. It's still cardio, but I might not be pushing myself as much or um, yeah, you kind of just have to wing it, unfortunately, and I always just have something on standby and you just kind of say, okay, like, I mean, I can eat the same meal before 2 classes and I can still get different results uh, because there's so many other factors apart from just the type of exercise. There is that, like, yes, cardio typically you'll drop, strength may go up, but even within strength training, sometimes there's a little bit more cardio aspect. So then those ones I may be more stable compared to if I have one that is just asking everything of my muscles.
Thanks so much, Janet. I thought it was really nice when you talked about the meal planning portion as well. Ethan, our next question is for you. How has your academic knowledge shaped the way that you manage T1D around physical activity?
Okay, thanks for the question. Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question because I think my philosophy around like learning about type 1 diabetes has been like you can learn about some of it through medical school, but ultimately a lot of it has been kind of learning through personal experience and then also just learning by being involved in different networks of people who do different work around type 1 diabetes and exercise. So I'm very fortunate to have some friends who do work in this kind of thing in research. And so I learn a lot through them. But then I think a lot of it is understanding like physiologically what happens to your body. I think a lot of really, really good things were said so far about like the differences between like resistance training and like aerobic activity. And so I guess I'll start my answer with that. So resistance training, as most of us have probably experienced, tends to raise our blood sugars, and that also goes with things like high intensity exercise, like sprinting. Um, so aerobic exercise can decrease blood sugar, and so I think it's important to like understand that when you do these different types of activity, your management around what you're doing in preparation is going to change. So usually like what I do is like when I'm planning out what activity I'm going to be doing, especially like in advance, like I was talking about time blocking earlier, I'll also kind of keep in mind like some things might require a lot more prep than others. So what I've learned is like when I'm, for example, running or doing a bit more of an aerobic based workout, what's helped is to use activity mode, whereas doing a bit more of a strength training workout doesn't really benefit from activity mode a lot. So just to, I guess, brief people who might not even be on a pump or might not be familiar with activity mode. So I use the tandem pump, and activity mode is basically setting a bit higher of a threshold for what your target sugar is. I believe it's like 8 point something, and it basically sets a little bit higher than what it would usually be, because the idea is that you would ideally want to avoid hypoglycemia. So in an activity like resistance training where blood sugars tend to rise, for me, it doesn't make much sense to set that target higher because I know I'm going to be having my blood sugar rise anyway. But activity mode is very helpful, especially when you're running, because it keeps that target a bit higher and it kind of offsets some of the challenges of avoiding hypoglycemia. But what I've also learned recently is like it's not only about what settings you're using, but also what like how far in advance you're using these settings. So there were some guidelines that were put out from research recently that talked about the value of setting exercise mode as early as like 90 minutes before you start exercise. And so I've tried that out a lot, and I guess that just goes back to the to like what Janet was talking about earlier as well, with like being mindful about how far in advance like you're doing exercise, and there's many ways around preparing yourself so you can do that exercise mode. Some people like taking a bit less of a bolus with their last meal. Other people like eating a certain amount of carbs right before they start. And so I think just understanding how your body reacts to different types of exercise can help. And again, like I think I'm very, very early in my training, and so I can't say that all this is just objective academic knowledge, but some of this has been knowledge that I've gained just through talking with people. Through the Diabetes Hope Foundation and also other organizations, I've chatted with a lot of people who do a lot of different types of activity, and the general consensus just seems to be some of the things that I've talked about. So again, I think just understanding how your body specifically reacts to different types of exercise can help you to, make the most of the activity. And as Deborah was saying, like sometimes you have to balance doing activity with kind of suffering the consequences that might result on your blood sugars, and just reminding yourself that it's a good thing that you did activity regardless of, how your blood sugars might respond, because it's not always in our control.
I know that you kind of echoed what Deb said. I think that a lot of potentially new T1Ds who have been just diagnosed, or people who've had T1D for many years and just kind of starting out their exercise journey, they may feel that anxiety, that fear, that like I don't want to go high, and so they almost don't want to work out because of that fear. Can maybe both Ethan and Deb, can you kind of like speak to how you've kind of overcome that? And Janet, if you have anything to add, please jump in.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess I can speak. I mean, listen, I'm in the same boat as everybody else, kind of, even though it's my profession, because I still deal with the same, like right now, my sugar's 13, and who the hell knows where it's going after that high rocks thing, I took my pump off, and I'm like still Like, do I have tips for people? I don't know, because it's all like the struggle is real, you know? But the reality is I mean, even with my own endo, like she says, the chronic effect of the exercise on the cardiovascular system and the muscular system and the insulin sensitivity is going to be better, but like on a day-to-day basis the stability may be a little bit harder to achieve. So it's, she's, I think, tried to help me come to terms with the fact that, yeah, like realistically, when I was pregnant and not doing as much exercise, my sugars were like way more stable and my time in range was actually easier to achieve. But when I'm exercising, there is a little bit more fluctuations based on fluctuations that are happening physiologically that aren't predictable, or like things that I do in my head that I think are going to work and then end up not working. Like, I'll eat that snack and think I'm exercising, so I'll take no insulin or I'll take half, and then it ends up being the wrong decision. But then the next day I do the same thing and take insulin and I end up going low. And like, I guess it is frustrating, but I think getting through that session just as safely as possible, because I think having, like, for everybody who exercises, having a low is kind of the most annoying thing and the most risky thing, and having a high is just kind of like whatever, but you can deal with that later. So I think coming into things maybe a little bit higher and titrating accordingly is, like, even if where you're testing things out and you see that you're high because you didn't take enough or you pulled back too much on the bolus or you had a snack and didn't take insulin, like, try that and then at least get through the exercise, and like you see, okay, I'm a little bit high and then I spiked after, you can deal with whatever corrections you need to deal with then. I think that the risk of going low is obviously more annoying because you feel like you can't complete the activity, or obviously there's more risk there, and then you're treating and treating and treating, and that's frustrating. So I would, if people are starting to try to get into it, I would say err on the side of pulling back more than you think you need to, and then, if that makes sense, kind of like dealing with the consequences later with insulin. And again, that means fueling properly, and then just watching your sensor and being like, okay, I'm a little high, so obviously that was a little bit too much of a pullback, and then adjust accordingly. But there are so many. I mean, I think that when I started exercising, I was just winging it and I didn't have a pump, so I'm not really sure how I did that, to be honest. It seems like without a CGM, like, that all seems like a very long time ago, and it's amazing to think that I was able to do that. But Mike Rydell's research, and his book on exercise, I think, was really helpful. Him and Bruce Perkins and some of they have a lot of really good articles about exercise, kind of what Ethan was talking about in relation to some of the things that we know about what the body is doing with regards to stress hormones in the liver, and what, how the stress hormones affect glucose production in the body. So that really helped, I think, give me an explanation and a grounding place for understanding why, when I did cardio, or why when I freaking walk around the block, like, I go low, but when I go and do CrossFit, I seem not to have to adjust things too much. But all that to say, like, I've had runners who say that they go high. I can't personally understand that, but I think that it's a little bit of, if that's a stress to your body, or your body's finding that stressful, or maybe they're not an efficient runner, so that is causing a stress response, then they may spike from that, right? Or they may spike after that because, maybe they did that run fasted and then had a bit of a liver response. And so I guess what I'm saying is that the more you can talk to your team and the more you can understand the physiology, I think, around what the body is doing, the more that you can kind of be adaptable and flexible to how you might want to start troubleshooting, and then just let go of the perfection and just deal with whatever you're dealing with. I think on a, like, being prepared, like Janet said, like having the juice, and not, like, and you go for a run, have multiple bars because you may not need them, but you might, right? And just being prepared kind of for any kind of scenario. And if you have to give yourself a little bit of insulin to correct for highs, then you do that too.
So I was just going to add on just like personal experience of when you get that post-exercise high because, yeah, cut back my insulin too much or, oh, didn't quite get that right, is to always be cautious of how much you actually do as your correction. Is like, so I have found that, I might, wow, I spiked up to 13. I can give virtually no insulin, and before I know it, it will start to come down a little bit on its own. So you don't want to necessarily give that full amount because again the body's going to be, oh, I'm no longer, it may be that it's decreasing that stress, it's going to start needing to recover from that workout. So that's just my personal tidbit of don't panic at the high. It will probably start to come down a little bit on its own, so then you can always just be a little more gentle with your correction, and then again you play it out over time, so if you get to find what works best.
So from personal experience, like when I was diagnosed, and I guess the original question was just like um, what are some things that you tell someone who's kind of experimenting with exercise and perhaps is newly diagnosed? And I can empathize with this because when I was diagnosed when I was 12, like I was in the middle of like competitive sports. Like my high school had competitive soccer and basketball that I both loved being part of. And so I initially had to pull back for a few weeks on those just to figure out like if this was even something that I was able to continue to do. And I think part of it is just slowly exposing yourself to different types of exercise you enjoy and actually not shying away from it because when you're doing stuff that you enjoy and seeing how your blood sugars react, like that's a step in the right direction of figuring out how you can continue to do the things that you enjoy and if you don't want to see what your body's gonna do when you do that kind of exercise, like you'll never really know. But the other thing being like as I started to move towards other kind of types of activity like weight training and then also like hybrid training like running, I think the kind of process kind of starts all over again and you feel like maybe you figured things out for when you were playing soccer or basketball, but then now you're back to step one, figuring out how your body responds to new types of training. So I think to someone I'd say that even though you might feel like you're very far behind other people who might have figured it out, no one really has it figured out, and as soon as someone starts a new type of activity, they're pretty much in the same place that you are, with no guarantee that any of the experience they've had with any other activity can apply. So yeah, I just say like don't be afraid to safely kind of challenge yourself to continue doing the things that you like, and then kind of also leaning on support systems. So for me, it was just confiding in a few people who were on my soccer team that this is what I was experiencing and kind of how to help me if something were to go wrong. So you have a bit of a safety net in case something happens, but also to share some of the concerns and around your lifestyle with your endocrinology team as well, so they can give you professional advice and help you achieve your goals in that way.
No, thank you. Thank you, all three of you. I think what's standing out for me, and I think Deb, you were the one that said is you need to let go of the perfection. I feel like that's going to be like the quote for the webinar. Just you got to let go of the perfection. You're not going, unfortunately, to stay in that straight line when you work out. Something is going to happen, and that's okay because everyone, all T1Ds have experienced that.
I have one thing to say that has been helpful, whether it was kind of like adjusting to getting to know like basal rates or bolus rates, like, switching back onto the pump after going back to injections or whatever applies to exercise too, where if you're starting to get into exercise or you're starting to get into a new sport, one of the things that's been helpful for me would be to have like a block of, let's say, like 4 days where I try to just do the same activity duration and follow the same protocol sort of thing. So you're almost doing like the same way that maybe we did like basal testing or something like that, where it's only for a period of time and it's not to say that this is how life is going to be, but to say that like with as few things changing as possible, just do some repeatability work, like almost like a case study or an experiment. Um, Even within in the context of that, we know that there's still, like Janet said, you had a shitty sleep, or it's that time of the month, or who knows why that breakfast that day caused a high. And I mean, there's always going to be factors, but controlling the controllables can be helpful and just giving you that sense of control where you're saying, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm going to do a 30-minute run after breakfast, and my breakfast is going to be the same thing every day with the same coffee. And, like just not, if that's what you do, just keep it the same and see what the response is. Because, I mean, again, it's not that that will always 100% of the time work out perfectly, but it might give you a sense of some predictability to what's actually going on without all the change. And then the more you can do that, then you can be flexible. And I think even within the confines of that, if you do that and you also have somebody that you trust from your diabetes team that isn't you looking at your stuff, like your patterns and stuff, I always feel like, we're so in it ourselves. Like we're like, oh, I don't know. And then I took a shower and then it was, that we can't, like it's sometimes hard for ourselves to see through all of that, but your team doesn't know anything about what you were doing and they're just looking at like the numbers and seeing the trends and they're sort of objective. So they can sometimes see things that are happening that you can't because you're too involved. So sometimes you can do that with them and have a plan and say, I'm going to repeat that for a week, doing the same thing with the same meals at the same time. Then okay, when I do a morning workout, this tends to be what happens. Let them have a look and then they can help you. So that's one thing that I would say, rather than trying to say, okay, I'm going to start to exercise, you jump right into it and you're doing like CrossFit one day at 4 o'clock and then the next day you go for a run and then ideally you get there, but that might be too much stimulus to try to be figuring things out.
Deb, I'm actually going to stay with you on like a foodie idea. What's, in your experience, one practical tip or a nutrition insight you wish more people with T1D knew?
I honestly think it's just using the sensor data to address your own patterns. It's really the only practical thing that I can say because it's just so individualized. It's like the practical tip is come prepared with more sugar than you think and use your sensor to try to establish some semblance of your own reactions to what you're doing. I mean, it's the same as I would say for anybody, really, like any athlete, you know what I mean? It's kind of like eat your meals, have as much healthy food and fuel as you can, and be prepared. Outside of that, there isn't really anything that I would say specific to diabetes. I have literally never given the same advice to two people exercising with diabetes. Do you know what I mean? Because it's just
Totally.
literally, yeah, it's just everybody is different. Time of day, some people, like Janet said, she goes low more in the morning. Some people I know have only work out in the morning because that's when they're most insulin resistant and so it prevents lows. So like, go figure, right? There's just so much, I think, individuality to how the body is working, that the only system that I understand is to understand your own patterns to the best of your ability within knowing that there isn't always going to be patterns all the time and having that little bit of preparation, to so that you can deal with the unpredictables, right?
Yeah, I like how Janet said at the in earlier in the webinar too, there's no one size fits all. Like exercise affects all of us differently. So thanks for sharing your experience. Janet, I'm actually going to move the next question to you. What role has movement or exercise played in your life, and how is it related to your T1D management?
So, I mean, one of the biggest things is that it just gets you moving, which in general is good health, no matter T1D or not. It has become a way for, helping make, as much as we all talk about the challenges of it, it does also make managing diabetes easier, just because it helps that insulin resistance. I know that I can, if I eat and go for a walk, I know I'm not going to need as much insulin. So it kind of helps build a little bit of like a reason to move within my day just because I know it's going to give me better control, but also just better mental health. And we all know, like, when you're not as stressed, then your blood sugars, you're going to sleep better. Your blood sugars are going to generally be better because you don't have the cortisol raising it up. So even just movement has been a really good uh, thing for like just my stress management overall, which kind of helps a little with the diabetes management.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think this moves us to our group question portion of the night. Quickly, what is your favorite meal to meal prep for, breakfast, lunch, or dinner? And this is open to everybody.
So I'm a very boring person and I eat the exact same breakfast every single day. I always just have like a lot of like it's Greek yogurt. I always like to add like a fiber, like flaxseed kind of blend into it just to kind of give me something to feel a little more full. I add in some fresh fruit, a little bit of milk, and then I always add actually a tiny little bit of protein powder just to like bump up. So that way I get a little bit more protein to start my day in case one of my other meals is not as good. And then a nice lunch dinner one, it kind of depends on my mood. I'd personally like to make a lot of like chickpea salads. So I'll be like chickpea. Sometimes I'll add tofu or edamame, some different greens, cucumbers and tomatoes to it just to add a little bit of oomph and excitement. But again, like I know how that one works for my blood sugars, so it works well for me.
For me, overnight oats have been a pretty standard go-to for me, and that's just because sometimes when it's busy, they're just kind of a quick but also very effective way of feeling fueled in the morning. And it honestly vary. There's so many recipes out there, and I've tried like as many as I can to just vary it up. But it'll just generally be like around half a cup of oats, and then I try some almond milk and then I'll put like either some like Greek yogurt on that, and then like some fruit, maybe some honey, and then I sometimes add protein powder. But I think the one thing to be aware is like because oats are fairly high in carb, like sometimes I have to be careful about not spiking too much in the morning. So I think that's why the half cup, it doesn't seem like a lot, and it truly isn't. I probably could have more, but you can kind of find filling with a lot of other things like fruit. And then yeah, I think I like to make a lot of like stir fries and just vary up the proteins. So I enjoy fish, but I also love like chicken and beef equally. But I do eat a lot of fish, and my go-to is usually salmon. So I like to have that, and then always make sure I have like a little bit of carb in there. Like so, generally it's rice, and then just different types of veggies to keep things interesting, like broccoli, edamame beans, like that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thanks. And Deborah, what would be yours?
My family, we have a family meal, so whether it's like chicken and rice and veggies, we're just always thinking about like when I make that chicken, I just make like two or three times as much, and then for the next 2 or 3 days, I don't need to spend sort of a focused time on meal prep because that was an easy meal, and then I have the components of those meals that I can transfer over into easy lunches, whether I put that in a wrap or I put that in a salad. And so, from a carb standpoint, I know that the carbs that I'm choosing are pretty predictable, whether it's my gluten-free bread that I know because it has a label, or it's rice, which is something that I know how I respond to pretty well, or it's a gluten-free wrap that again has a certain, like set amount. So that's my alternative to doing like structured meal prep. The other thing that would be typical for me would be using cottage cheese and Greek yogurt as sort of the base of a lot of my meals, which doesn't, again, require a whole lot of like ahead of time thought. It just requires like, thinking about having those things always in my fridge for the week. So I'll have large containers of Greek yogurt or cottage cheese, and I know that that's going to be my protein base, which is something that I prioritize. And then the carbs might be a granola that I've made, or like the oats, like Ethan mentioned, or just some fruits and things like that. And sort of fill it in with nuts and fruits and just sort of all of those things that are maybe more staples that I always have in my pantry. And sometimes that's my lunch because I need something that's quick and easy. And I always know, again, for me, like predictable, like I know that those things are pretty level for my glucose levels. I understand the carbs that are in them, so I feel that I can manage that easily. And I think maybe going back to practical tips, like that can also be helpful. I mean, is just having a few meals that you kind of roll through when everything else maybe feels overwhelming and that it's changing and you're not sure what's going on with your sugars. If you have a few meals that you can predict how they react, then again, you're sort of taking out another one of those unknowns that can be trickier, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Deb.
So for the exit poll, we had one last question for our speakers. With what quick words of encouragement would you share with someone on their exercise journey with T1D? Ethan, would you like to go first?
Sure. Words of encouragement. I just say to like keep at it and not, I guess, lose hope because exercise is very, very important. And I feel like a common theme in a lot of our answers was just that like it's very unpredictable. And even though you might have it figured out one day, the next day it might be totally different. So I think just to normalize some of the challenges might be a good way to go. And rather than being hard on yourself or having an ideal picture of how everything should go, maybe just to give yourself a bit of grace and to kind of take the challenges as they come and always reach out for support and that it's truly possible to figure things out. And what works for you might also not work for other people. So just to, I guess, stay authentic to what works for you and then always, reach out for help if you need it.
Thanks so much. Deborah, how about you?
I guess from a professional standpoint, I think that the research on exercise, especially with aging and longevity, is just like so magically amazing and strong that there's, as much as I'm a dietitian, I would say that there's few things that I talk about more in my practice than exercise, both as a combination of cardiovascular exercise and strength training in terms of VO2 max and also just the functionality of muscle mass when it comes to body composition and metabolic health. And I mean, again, given the risk factors that we do have as people with diabetes, I think like those small, like sometimes, day-to-day frustrations with lack of perfection in glucose levels, even, even a slightly elevated A1C as a result of that because of the lack of, you know, predictability, your overall health, longevity, and mitigating risk of all things diabetes and non-diabetes related. I think a large piece of that is exercise, and the younger you get started with it and can maintain that, overall better of mitigating everything else. So I think that, as people with diabetes, we often feel like there's so many things that's out of our control. But I think that, cost benefit of having a little bit of that day-to-day troubleshooting and sometimes lack of perfection, the long-term benefits of exercise outweighs it all, and that you're sort of overcompensating for that in terms of health. So find your group, find your, like people like us, like, find your support network to kind of get through it and do it because it's so worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Janet, what are your words to end the session?
Keep showing up. It's not going to be perfect. So like be kind to yourself as you figure it out. Even I've one time was trying to do a spin class. It took me, I think, almost 4 weeks to be able to make it through the spin class and getting my settings figured out. So it's be kind to yourself. There's lots of support, whether through the organization, your diabetes team, even other Facebook groups. Everybody, we all have unique experiences. So, but what I say doesn't work for me, may work for you. So you might say, oh, let me try that. So just don't give up. It is a lot of work, but it's worth it in the end.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you again to our three amazing speakers for taking time out of your weekend today to be here with us as well.